Hello, everyone. Hello, Hungry Kales watching on the streaming platforms, and hello, everyone here at the hall. We are continuing our important conversations and the Plan X market, and tonight's topic is food and culture. My name is Nemanja Golubovic, and I will be your moderator. My guest is so amazing tonight that I just cannot wait to introduce her to all of you. If I were to write her bio, I think I would be very subjective because I'm a huge fan of her. So instead, I'm gonna read what Wikipedia page says about her. Okay? And then we will give her an opportunity to correct if there is something wrong on a Wikipedia page. But about my tonight's guest, Wikipedia page says following. She is an American attorney and a vegan author and a content creator, widely known as the Korean vegan. She started her food blog in 2016 and began posting videos of her cooking and life stories in 2017. As of December 2023, she has over 1 million subscribers on YouTube and 3 million followers on TikTok. Her debut book, The Korean Vegan, was selected as one of the best cookbooks of 2021 by New York Times and The New Yorker. It was an instant New York Times bestseller and it won James Beard Award. Please give applause for Joanne Molinaro!
Thank you. It's shockingly accurate.
It was all correct, right?
Yes, it was.
Perfect. Well, that makes me so happy. So, before we even start the conversation, I want to say from all of this information I just said, I feel like professional success is there. And sometimes we meet all of these very successful people and we get disappointed. But I want to say that I know you as a person, and I just want to say how wonderful human being you are, and that's extremely important to me. You're very generous, you're very kind, and I'm going to share a little secret. I was very nervous my previous panel over here, but Joanne was the one who helped me prepare the questions and be ready for that panel, which was not the case for tonight. But I just wanted to share your generosity. Besides all this professional success, you're also an amazing human being, and we just love you for that. Let's talk food.
Let's talk.
Very first question for you is, when we start thinking about food, I want to know, what is your first memory of food?
Yeah, so this is a very difficult question. Neiman shared this question with me in advance because he said that it was going to be tricky. And I told him that had he not, I probably would have ended up lying because I really can't. Took me a long time to think of my first memory of food, but it would have to be cereal. When I was a little toddler, my mom would take me to like church friends' houses and her high school friends' houses, and all the little kids would be playing, and I would always be the one kid in the kitchen who would scan the ceiling for the cereal boxes. Because I don't know about you, but in my house, we always kept the cereal boxes on top of the refrigerator. And so I was always looking on top of the refrigerator because I loved cereal. So that is my first memory of food. I wish it would be rice or chook or something more authentic, but it just isn't.
That's fair enough. But I'm wondering, when it comes to you preparing food for the first time, what is the memory of that?
I think I have two memories in relation to preparing food. I remember my grandma. Both my grandmothers lived with me. My 외할머니, which is my maternal grandma, and my 친할머니, they both lived with me. My 외할머니 until I was 4, and my 친할머니 until I was 14. And they were really the ones in charge of the kitchen. My mom really didn't cook very much. I know it says Omma's Kitchen on the cookbook. But I learned a lot from her when my grandmothers passed away. But in terms of my childhood, it was my grandmothers who did all the cooking. My grandmothers were both farmers. So we had this really beautiful yard of like zucchini and pumpkin and chili peppers, tomatoes, corn, all the different vegetables. And that's where we would cook from. I never actually made any food, but my grandmother would always task me with getting kenyip, which is perilla leaves from our backyard. That was like my big job. Oh, I'm contributing to dinner today because I got all the kenyip, which if you're Korean, we usually eat that raw or pickled. And then my other job was, my grandma always had these huge mountains of mung bean sprouts. And my job was to pick off all the tails of the mung bean sprouts so that they were, nice and clean for when she cooked them. So that was like my earliest memories of helping to prepare food. It wasn't until much later, I would say probably when I was in high school, that I tried to bake my first cake. That was a dismal failure. I mean, it was so bad. I had no idea what half the words meant, like whipped to stiff peaks. I didn't know what that meant. And it was so bad that we ended up just throwing it away because nobody would eat it.
Not even you?
No, we would not eat it. Like, I felt like it was dangerous to eat.
Yeah, I feel I would still finish it just out of pride. Yeah, it's good. Like, you don't like it, that was great for me. But anyway, when it comes, as you mentioned, growing up, when it's the first time you notice that you're eating the food that it's not typical for the rest of the people, because cereal, you said, like everybody eats cereal in the morning. What are the times you notice, like, I'm eating this, but no other kids are doing it?
I would say my first time of really noticing that was when I started going to school and when we had to bring lunch to school. And my grandmother's cooked for me, and I ate food probably like most little kids, which is sometimes I'll eat it, sometimes I won't. And it wasn't until I went to school and I opened my lunchbox and it looked extremely different and smelled very different from what everybody else brought to school. And, kids act differently, and I think children today are a little bit more tolerant to diversity. But at that time, I didn't want to be different. I wanted my lunchbox to look exactly the same as everyone else's. And I remember thinking that my grandmother was a total failure. And I was like, how could she send me to school like this? Like, doesn't she know better that she should make me ham sandwiches instead of sending me with like kimbap and blah, blah, blah. And I remember thinking that, and I was really angry with her. I was angry at my parents. I distinctly remember being angry about not just the food, but angry at my hair color. How come I can't speak English? Why? I don't even understand these words that are coming out of everyone's mouth. I was so ill prepared in my view. And I think that was one of the first times where I was like, I don't want to be Korean. I just want to be like everybody else. And that definitely included the food.
When you told them, I don't like this food, I don't want it, what your grandma would say to that?
So my mom, she was, even though she wasn't at home very much and certainly wasn't in the kitchen, she was definitely the matriarch of my family. And she had a very progressive view about what it meant to be American, which is, well, Joanne needs to fit in. She needs to wear the same clothes as everyone. She needs to learn perfect English. That was like a huge thing for her. She was always nervous that her own poor English, which is a joke because my mom speaks beautiful English, but she thought she had poor English and she didn't want to influence me with her English speaking. That was really important to her. So eventually my grandmother got on the program and she started packing ham sandwiches and potato chips and juice boxes, which ironically were terrible. Like, they were just awful food, but at least it looked the same. I remember many times throughout my adolescence, even into high school, every time my mom would say, "You're Korean," I would say, "No, I'm American." Like, it was a big point that I needed her to understand. And in retrospect, I think it hurt her a lot. It hurt my mom. It probably also hurt my grandmothers. They didn't really get the brunt of it, but my mom certainly did. And she was always so... my mom's a very fierce lady, but her retort was always very weak. It was also, "But you're Korean too." But it wasn't said with the kind of force that I think she wanted to, because it was out of pain.
But didn't you enjoy that food?
No.
So you didn't even like, no, not the food that they ended up making you, but the original food that they would pack you. Was not that something you personally liked?
I think I was just a kid. Like, like I was like every other kid. I wanted chicken nuggets and mac and cheese and what everyone else was eating. I was like desperate for McDonald's, which we only got to eat like 3 times a year. I wanted the most hideous food. Like I was like, I want SpaghettiOs. And like we never got to have SpaghettiOs. And like, I want to eat meatloaf, whatever this meatloaf thing is that everybody else has. I want it. Like it was just like really crappy food. But I just thought that this was the most delicious food because that's what was in the restaurants. And that's what I saw on television, on Family Ties. And, you know, for better or worse, probably worse, that was the only representation of good eating and family eating that I was seeing. And in my house, that was considered an anomaly.
When is that starting to change?
That started to change in college. It took a really long time, pathetically. But I went to college. I went to University of Illinois at Urbana, which has a very robust Asian American community. And as a result of that, there were a lot of small Korean eateries. And I think part of that was a function of the fact that many Asian American students like myself who, you know, turned their nose at their food, all of a sudden when they didn't have it, in college, they didn't have their moms and grandmas and aunts to make them the food, realize, oh, you know, actually, I kind of like that food. I don't even know what it's called, but I kind of like it. And that was exactly me. I didn't even know the names of the dishes that my grandmas made for me. And thank God, this one restaurant at Urbana, they had a picture menu, so I could look through the pictures and say, "Oh yeah, this."
I still need pictures.
These noodles look like something my grandma made. This is what I want to eat, and that is literally how I became more well versed in Korean cuisine. It's very sad. I'm embarrassed, but that's very honest.
Yeah. Today, I know how proud are you to be Korean. So when is that changing too? Is it also the same time with the food that you are started calling yourself, I'm Korean?
That's a great question. The food awakening occurred literally because I just missed the food. I mean, that was like a very primal thing. I think my willingness to adopt my mother's "you're Korean too," that probably happened in high school. There was a small but very fierce contingent of Korean Americans in my high school. I went to New Trier, which is, you know, right around here. And they embraced their otherness in sort of a almost adversarial way. And there was something very like, yeah, we know we're different and we know we're not like the majority of the school, but we're proud of it. And, you know, it was a little, I don't know, like the word like yuchihe if you're Korean, like it's very like immature, but it was also fun, and it was like a nice way for me to channel my feelings about being othered for so much of my life. And then I turned that around. I started writing pretty creatively and seriously in my junior year in high school. It's when I started taking creative writing, and I started, you know, I'm a big reader my whole life. And I wrote one essay about being a Korean American, and my teacher just loved it. And you know how like if you have one teacher who believes in you and that one thing that you didn't really think you were that good at, but all of a sudden somebody thinks you are, that's when I started kind of taking a much more introspective look at my identity. And then I minored in Asian American studies when I was at undergrad, and I, you know, made it part of my study. I wrote my thesis on Asian American poetry when I graduated. And by that time, it was as much a matter of my identity and pride as it was an academic investigation of identity in the United States and, you know, globally.
Did you have to go back to mom and grandma and ask a lot of questions?
I wish I had gone back to my grandma's. You know, my grandma, I spoke Korean. That was my first language because my grandmas taught me to speak, and they only spoke Korean. But of course, because my mother especially was so adamant about learning English in order for me to assimilate, which I understand why she felt that, I forgot so much of Korean. And also, there's this thing in Korean language, it's and it's in many languages, it's called formal speak. You know how in Spanish you add the usted,
Yeah, of
for
course.
formal, and there are like extra syllables and words that you add when you're speaking to your elders. And while I understand that as a sign of respect, I never used formal speak with my grandma when I was a child, when I was learning how to speak. But by the time I was old enough, it was considered rude for me to not use that formal speak with my grandma. Unfortunately for me, I felt that formal speak created this sort of distance and a remoteness between myself and the women who raised me. And it became almost awkward for me to be overly emotional or intimate with the two women who loved me. And so I never did those things like, Harmony, can you teach me how you make this? Or Harmony, what was it like growing up? Harmony, what was your favorite food? I never asked her any of those questions, which remains one of my biggest regrets. Luckily, I have asked all of those questions of my mom and my dad and my aunts and anyone who will speak to me. Continue to ask them those questions, and that sort of excavation has been one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done.
Beautiful. I love this. Some things that I didn't even know. So it's amazing. Now we're going to go to completely new life, next chapter and everything. You decided to go vegan. How did that happen?
So there are so many different parts of that story. I wish it was as simple as, I watched Cowspiracy and the next day I decided, but that isn't, my story. My now husband, then boyfriend, who's rambling around here somewhere, he decided to cut out meat from his diet. He was vegetarian for the first half of his life and decided to return to that, mostly for health reasons. And, obviously we were dating and he was like, oh, no, I won't judge you if you don't do this with me. And I was like, yes, you are going to so judge me. But he kept saying he wouldn't. And I was like, well, good, because I'm not going vegan because I'm Korean and you can't take my kimchi from me. Like, it was very hostile. And I was very against it. But he kept making me watch the movies like Cowspiracy, Forks Over Knives. This is what was available to us. We did not have What the Health or Game Changers. That didn't exist yet. This was in 2016. And so, I watched those movies and I was like, okay, fine. Like, I'll try it. I was doing most of the cooking at that time already, and I was tired of having to cook 2 different meals every meal. So I was like, fine, I'll try it. What's the worst that could happen? Because I could always just go back to eating meat if I didn't like it. Now, one of the movies that we watched was Forks Over Knives, and if you remember, there was that study where they show a graph of prostate cancer in East Asian men. And it was like, prior to the 70s, it was like, do. And then, like, all of a sudden after the 70s, it's like, boom, huge spike in prostate cancer in East Asian men. Didn't really think much of it. But 2 weeks after watching that movie, I found out my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He is an East Asian man who started eating lots of red meat in the 70s when he came here to the United States. And I had at that point already cut out meat in this experiment. And, I took it as a sign from God or the universe that maybe this is something that I need to do more permanently. It just seemed like such a strange coincidence. And so that's when we cut out meat. Dairy and eggs followed a couple weeks after that and turned out to be a lot easier than I expected. And I've never even thought once about going back.
Perfect. I know you often share how for you food is a love language, and I think it's so beautiful. And you mentioned multiple times that you were scared of how you're going to show love to your husband if he goes vegan and you don't, like you needed to feed him with that food. So I mentioned this on a previous conversation right over here that the love will always do it. Like, I know so many stories where people are like, well, I went vegan for love relationship, which it's beautiful. Love will do it. That's wonderful. But then your biggest fear of going vegan was that you are Korean, now proud Korean, right? Isn't it wild and irony how you're like, didn't want to be Korean, but now you were scared that that's going to be taken away from you. So in order to be Korean and a vegan, you named yourself the Korean vegan.
I didn't name myself, to be honest.
Your blog.
No, my husband named it.
Yeah.
Because we had so many conversations, quite candidly, fights about it. Because when he was trying to convince me to go vegan, I'll be very frank, I was like, you're a white guy. Like, you have no idea what you're asking me to give up. My identity is wrapped up in kimchi and 깻잎 and, galbi and kimchi jjigae. Like, none of these foods you've ever even tried. How dare you ask me to give something up without even having one iota of understanding of what these things mean to me. These are the foods my grandmother has fed to me. And yes, I was a little brat about it, but it was still so meaningful to me. And so, when I finally made the decision to join him and it kind of stuck, he was trying to be very nice and complimentary. I baked him some chocolate cake or something like that. He was like, my God, it was so good. You should start a YouTube channel. You're the Korean vegan. That's what you can call it. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And I started my YouTube channel and my Facebook and Snapchat and all of that.
And a blog, right?
And, all under, under the Korean vegan. So that's how it started. But yes, I was very afraid that I was afraid of two things. I was afraid that veganism would dilute my Koreanness, yes. But I was also afraid that the Korean community would doubt my commitment to being Korean, that I had somehow betrayed them. I think the first concern I had, I no longer have that concern. If anything, I feel like so much more on solid footing about who I am and what it means to be a Korean person. I have done so much research on Korean cuisine, my own family's history, and Korean history in general, none of which I would have ever undertaken with the level of thoroughness that I had I not gone vegan. I think the second fear about the Korean community's receptiveness to my story and my cuisine, I think that will always
it's still
remain
there,
a fear.
right?
Yeah.
And you feel that sometimes you get, like, being a content creator, you're exposed to people all the time and you hear things like that. For me, I got familiar about Korean cuisine through you. So when people mention the Korean food, I immediately assume, veganism. So how wrong am I?
You're not that wrong, actually.
Exactly. That's what I want to hear from you. Like, how hard for you was to be Korean vegan?
That's an interesting question. I mean, from a logistical and purely food perspective in the United States, and as someone who knows her way around the kitchen, it's not that hard. Just don't use fish sauce, and then you can eat 90% of Korean food. I mean, because that's it's muchims and kimchis and all of these different veg-forward recipes, most of which are pickled and seasoned with fish sauce. So if you get rid of the fish sauce or replace the fish sauce with, a rich umami mushroom sauce or kelp sauce or something like that, then you're in pretty good shape right there. If you go to Korea, that's different. You're going to have a hard time because so much of the food in Korea looks vegan. Kimchi looks vegan, right? Unless you look really close.
I was shocked to learn that it's not.
So much of the food in Korea looks vegan, but like I said, so much of it is seasoned with or pickled with fish sauce, so it's not technically vegan. They probably also use honey in many situations as well. They don't use a lot of dairy, and even eggs, not too much. You'll know which ones have eggs in it, basically. So it's a little trickier. The one saving grace for a lot of vegans, I was just talking to my family yesterday, we're planning a trip to go to Korea next year, is we're going to do a cooking class / video on temple cuisine. Oh, wow. So Korean temple cuisine, that's been around for probably over a millennia, and it's Buddhist cuisine, which is de facto plant-based, right? So Korea actually has this wonderful long tradition of naturally plant-based food. And what's even more exciting is that many of the nuns who prepared the food in the temples, they were either practitioners of medicine, so they prepared food with the idea of healing bodies, or they came from the palaces because, I don't know if many of you are familiar with Korean history, but if you worked in the palace, you were not allowed to get married. You were not allowed to have your own families. Your whole life was serving the royal family. So once you're kind of kicked out and forced to retire, many of them went to the temples to serve out the rest of their careers. And they brought all of that knowledge of palace food from the palaces into these Buddhist kitchens. So much of temple cuisine, when you see it in Korea, it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, they're Michelin-rated restaurants in Korea that are temple restaurants. They're stunning because they should be stunning. They came from Korean royalty.
Are those the places you were visiting when you went to Korea? You said it might be hard for somebody who wants to go to Korea to maintain being vegan. How was for that? What did you eat?
So we did do some temple restaurants, but like if you're there for longer than 3 days, it's going to be hard. I mean, temple restaurants aren't exactly cheap. And, obviously you can go to Itaewon, which is, the place where a lot of expats live and frequent, and you can get your plant burger and you can get your vegan milkshakes and things like that. But if you want authentic Korean cuisine that's also plant-based, it will be tricky. Maybe it's gotten easier. I was there in 2019.
What's the longest you stayed?
I stayed there for 10 days.
What did you do for 10 days?
So my sister-in-law, who's native Korean, she immigrated to the United States like 8 years ago. She went onto the internet and did all the searching in Korean on Korean blogs to point me in the direction of, this, it didn't say on the sign vegan or anything like that, but we knew, okay, this is a vegan restaurant because they do mostly Buddhist cuisine or temple-ish cuisine. Some of them were in people's basements and not really restaurants. But literally, my husband and I say this, some of the best food we've ever eaten. I mean, if you get a chance to eat real Korean food, and I mean muchim, which is the roots and the vegetables, the produce pulled out of the ground. Korea has these beautiful mountains, and the mountain water comes in, and the onions that you see, the carrots, they're this big. It's not like the vegetables you see here in the United States, which are weak and anemic. I mean, these are beautiful vegetables. You could just pick them off the ground and just eat it. But I mean, then when they're seasoned with sesame oils and perilla oil and a little bit of, plum wine or, whatever fermented ginger seasoning that, the ajima has in the ground, this is the best food you'll ever eat. Healthy and designed to heal your body and your soul and do minimum damage to the planet.
It made me laugh that you said that some of them were in a people's basement. When I traveled to Belgrade, Serbia, a couple years ago, now you'll see signs all over vegan, but a couple years ago, a friend told me, there's this great vegan place where we can go, and we went, and it was basically basement apartment.
Yeah.
Somebody I was so underground. I was is it illegal to be vegan here? So we're hiding it.
So good. It's so delicious. There's this literally, it was in someone's basement, and it was just trays of hot tray foods, and it just had I don't know, 50 different dishes. It was so, so good.
Perfect. Are they now the restaurants that do have the word vegan in?
Yeah, so I remember I was in Insadong. I mean, obviously, like I said, in Itaewon, you can find it very easily. I mean, they cater to an English-speaking audience there, so you'll find it pretty easily. But I remember when I was in Insadong, there was this place that, half the name was in Korean, but then it said vegan, really clearly. And they had tteokbokki, and they had odeng, and they had all the Korean street foods. And it was so good. It wasn't the best tteokbokki I ever ate in my life or anything like that, but it was just so lovely to be in Korea, in the middle of Insadong, which is flourishing market area, eating tteokbokki off a skewer with my family. That was something that I hadn't experienced since I'd gone vegan, and to have that sort of fellowship with my family again in that way was really amazing.
That's beautiful. I love it. I wanted to ask you now, I hear so much from other people, just any different culture. They always blame the culture on, I wish I could be vegan, but in my culture, it's all about eating meat. What is your advice for someone who wants to go vegan, but it's scared like you were that they're going to lose their cultural identity?
Well, I think that everyone's journey is different, but ask yourself, wouldn't it be really sad if your entire identity was hinging on food. Like, I know that food is a big part of culture, especially from, historically oppressed cultures. Because, at least for my parents were born in North Korea. They will never be able to go back to North Korea. They're never going to be able to enjoy naengmyeon in the nation that they were born, like, unless things change very radically politically over the next decade or so. They're never going to be able to do that. So for them and for their children, food is a huge part of identity because it's one of the few things that they have left. Food, language, and storytelling. Those are like the three pillars of cultural identity that they have to give to everyone who comes after them. So I understand that, but that's not the only thing that you have. And not only that, truly, if you look at most cultural cuisines, I really can't think of a single one where if you look at it, every single dish is meat. Every single dish is fish. Every single dish is eggs. Every single dish. That's just, every country is going to have grains. They're going to have vegetables. They're going to have a wide plethora of ingredients. So to say, oh, I'm sorry, like my culture only eats meat, I'm not saying it's disingenuous for you to think that, but I think it merits some additional investigation. Is this really true? And how much? So if you really take it down, well, actually, it turns out that only a fraction of my culture's food entails animal products. And also, my identity, only a fraction of my identity is composed of food. There are so many other things that make up who you are. And also, again, not to be controversial, but your cultural identity is also only a fraction of who you are. My Koreanness isn't all of me. I'm also a woman. I am also a wife. I am also a daughter. I am also a lawyer. I'm also an author. There are all sorts of things that compose who I am. And to limit who you are to what you eat, and not even what you eat, but the one kind of thing that you eat, that is a disservice mostly to you and nobody else. And you don't want to live that way.
Good. I like the advice. Yes, please. Go for it. Beautiful. I'm from Montenegro, and we grow up eating meat, but I simply didn't care. Like, no one could hurt me, tell me I'm not Montenegrin enough, because I don't care. Why is that so important to you? Do you think it's from the parents? Do you think it's your regret of being ashamed of it when you were growing up? Why? Like, if I tell you now you're not Korean enough, you're going to be hurt. Why is that?
Because if you spend so much of your life being othered for who you are, then the only source of power you have from that is taking it back from them. And that is definitely how I feel about my Koreanness. Wow. Is I felt, oh, you're going to make fun of me for my food? You're going to make fun of me for my hair color, my eye color, for the way that I talk, for the fact that I speak Korean sometimes, the fact that my grandma has an accent. You're going to make fun of me for all of those things. I'm going to take it back now. So for me, yes, like I think that was why my conversation with my husband, and I think he's very comfortable talking about this now, but at the time it was very fraught because I was like, you haven't had that lived experience that I had. Like, you don't know what it means to me to take this away from me because someone tried to take it away from me before and I took it back. So I'm not going to give it back. Like, it's not happening. And so there had to be this reckoning with what that meant and how to rebuild that language around food in a way that allowed me to live who I was, that was consistent with my values.
I feel so stupid now asking you this question because you're so right. Like, nobody ever made fun of me for being Montenegrin. Made for other things though, but not for being.
Exactly, but that's okay. Your lived experience, and I think that paralleled lived experience helps you to understand it and empathize.
But if you just did not share this with me, I would never think of it. I would never think of like, oh, she's been ridiculed because of like who you are. So, oh, wow, that was so good. Oh, my God. Listen, I want to talk about your cookbook.
Oh, yeah.
It's been over 2 years. Look at these people.
Yay.
They all showed up for you and for your book 2 years after the book has been out. It's like it just feels it's going to be evergreen book. Aww. And it's just absolutely amazing. And like, how does it feel?
It feels very surreal. Yeah, if somebody had told me 5 years ago you're going to write a cookbook, I would have been like, "What planet are you on?" I was a full-time lawyer. I was a litigator and trial lawyer at Foley and Lardner, which is I still work with them, but that's what I did full time. I never in my wildest dreams thought I would end up writing a cookbook until somebody was like, "You want to write a cookbook?" And I was like, "Well, I guess I could write a cookbook," and so I did. But I really wanted it to be specific. Like I was like, first of all, it's going to be veganized recipes of the things that I grew up eating, like 미역국, 김치찌개, 순두부찌개, 된장찌개, 잡채. Like these are all the foods that I grew up eating. I want to do those proud. And then it's going to share the stories of my family. I thought that too often food bloggers and recipe developers and cookbook authors, it was just a catalog of recipes.
And it gets forgotten.
It can be forgotten. I mean, there's some beautiful, like legendary, like Jacques Pepin type recipes that outlast decades and decades and decades. Sure, that was not my goal. My goal was to help people understand, if you love the food, then maybe love the people behind the food. And especially in Asian cuisine here in the United States, I was seeing too often this sort of weird representation of Asian food. And I'm not saying that my food is authentic or anything like that, but what I did want to be truthful to were the people who ate that food and the people who made that food and the people who introduced that cuisine to the United States, because I don't think that their stories were being shared nearly enough to merit their recognition. And that was something that was very important to me.
How much your family participated in helping you write a cookbook? How many times did you call your mom?
So I called my mom for like specific things. Like I remember I called my mom about 미역국. I was like, "Why is mine slimy?" Or like, I remember we talked a lot about japchae because she was like, "You got to do the water like this," and I was like, "This is really complicated, Oma." So there were a lot of things, and of course we did kimchi. Kimchi was like a full-on like. We started at like 4 in the morning and ended up at like 8 p.m., So that was like a big affair. My mom, my wesungmo, my imo, and my cousin, my female cousin, they all helped me cook. And then my male cousins and my brother, they helped me with like a lot of the heavy equipment. I photographed the entire book myself as well. Mm-hmm. And so they helped me to compose and move all the heavy equipment. And of course, they also helped with eating the food at the end of the day. So there was about 3 days where we shot, I would say about 30% of the book with my family. And that was like such a beautiful memory. I'm writing my second book right now, and they came over the summer to do the same thing. And I remember we just made this beautiful papsang of like kimbap and like 돈가스 and gochujang jjigae, and like it was just such a beautiful table. And I took the last photograph and I was like, "Okay, everyone, that's done." And then the whole table, we started clapping. And I just remember I almost started to cry because it's just like they're so invested in this now. And they were so not in favor of me going vegan when I first did. And now to have them on my team about this and contributing in this really honest and vulnerable way is so beautiful.
So you wrote all the recipes, you made them all, and you did your own photography.
Yes.
So you basically have done the entire book yourself. It's so incredible.
I did not print the book.
Well.
I was handled by my publisher, and I have a wonderful art director who I could not, Ashley, she's amazing. Mm-hmm. She took all of my photographs and made them look even more beautiful than I could have ever. I have to tell you, I'm not a professional photographer. I submitted these photographs, and I was like so scared that my editor was going to come back and be like, "Your photographs are so terrible. You're going to need to hire somebody to do them all over again." And instead, they just did such a beautiful job of making them look professional and gorgeous.
It's beautiful. And I remember 1 year after release of the book, it was still #1 selling book on Amazon. And it was just amazing. And now 2 years later, look at this. It's just so incredible. And it's just a lot of reasons to be proud of you. But you mentioned and stepped into my next question would be a cookbook #2. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so obviously I was super excited that book number one, people liked it. So I was like, okay, then I'll do another one. There are a lot of Korean recipes out there. There's lots of Korean food. I just mentioned some kimbap, and I think there's 7 different kinds of kimbap in this second book. There's going to be gochujang jjigae, which is like really popular right now in Korea. And that's really what this second book is about. The first one was much more about these are the foods I grew up eating, like 육개장, and like my mom would bring it home for us all the time. Or I even have in there like my mom's versions of American food, which is like her casserole. She's like really funny. Like I was like, "Are you sure you're supposed to put potatoes and pasta in the same thing?" She's like, "Yes, that's how Americans eat it." So I had like those recipes. This second book is much more about what's popular like in Korea right now. Like we have like a vegan strawberry milk, vegan yogurt milks, and like I mentioned, the gochujang pasta and all the different kinds of kimbap that are kind of trending. And they're also more like the kinds of food that I would cook at home now, which my husband's Italian American, so we often do sort of like, I hate to use the word fusion, but that's truly what it is. Like, I'll put gochujang in my pasta. I'll put gochujang in my marinara sauce. I'll, add doenjang to my salad dressing. I'll add tubu to my kale and white bean soup and things like that. So this book is going to be a little bit more of that. There'll still be plenty of veganized traditional Korean recipes that I consulted my mom and my aunt on, and I'm really excited for that as well.
Perfect. Also, the first book, it's full of stories,
Yeah.
stories about your family. Will the second book have something like that, or you feel like that chapter was for the book number one?
No, I think that anything I ever produce in a book format will have stories in them because I just, again,
You're a storyteller.
well, it's not just that I like telling stories. I feel like there's a lot of ground that needs to be covered to compensate for these stories being invisibilized for generations and generations and generations. It's like, where do you think this food came from? Like, it didn't come out of a white carton. Like, that's not where it was born. It came from people. And these people need to be kind of shoved into the light. I mean, I'm very lucky. My parents are very open to being shoved into the light, I guess. And so it will certainly continue to feature stories about my family. I think in this book, again, consistent with the types of food that we'll be seeing, there'll be stories that are perhaps a little bit more personal to me as well, in addition to my grandmas and my grandfather and my mom and my dad. But again, there'll be heavy writing in this one, and I'm excited. I already wrote the first essay, and it's about my grandmother and how she picked me up from school the first time I got sick, and then made me chun, and how lovely that was.
Beautiful. I cannot wait. I'm sure all of these people, we just cannot wait for the book number two. And, if it's as successful in this one, we don't have to ask to go more because it's just this one broke all the records and it's just so incredible. I love that you mentioned that you're a storyteller. I just want to tell you that that's how I got familiar with you too. And that my favorite ever, you all know Joanne's work, right? She creates this very short recipe videos where there's a story voiceover going on, and the one was about having a hard time to accept the compliments, and I was trying to compliment you the whole night long tonight. So
Thank you.
You deserved it, and exactly that's what learning how to say thank you. Well, this was wonderful. I just want to ask you the very last question, then we're going to allow the audience to ask the questions. Is maybe you don't want to share this, but maybe exclusively you want. What's the second book going to be called?
Yeah, so I don't know the full name. It is going to be called the Korean Vegan Cookbook again, and that is somewhat for legal reasons. I don't know if many of you are familiar, but somebody tried to rip off my first book called the Korean Vegan Cookbook. If you look it up on Amazon, you're going to see 14 books called the Korean Vegan Cookbook. And there's very little I can do about 14 of them, but there was one that not just ripped off my name, but ripped off my chapter titles, my chapter structure. They tried to take a photograph that looked very similar to my own. They used the exact same font, everything about it. I mean, and it was clearly even to me, I was like, is this my book? It was kind of confusing. And so we did have that book removed, but as a result of that, I reached out to my lawyers and I was like, what the heck? What can I do about this? And they said, Well, one thing you can do is create a series. So if you have a series of cookbooks that are all called the Korean Vegan, that trademark becomes stronger with every book, and it becomes much harder for people to rip me off. And actually, I didn't really mind because I was like, well, it's a brand that I've spent so much time developing. It's a good brand. It's very memorable, and it's pretty straightforward and understandable. I think the subtitle, we'll have to work on that. I wanted to call it "Eat This."
That's what I want. Yeah. I was hoping you would share this because that's how you finish your videos, right?
Eat this. But my editor was like, yeah, but that sounds like you want to punch somebody in the face. And I was like, oh, I didn't really think of it that way. So we're still ruminating.
Isn't it the way your family used to?
Yeah, they always say, 이거 먹어. 먹어, which is eat this in Korean. But I guess the American, I didn't even think of it, but there's an American saying like, eat this, would you like punch someone in the face? And that's what she thought of. And I was like, well, I don't want that. So I don't know.
I love the idea. And you also shared that that's how your family showed love too, with those words.
Yes, that was.
They wouldn't say, I love you, but they would say, eat this.
이거 먹어 was essentially, I love you. 먹어. That was the most, this is how I opened my book, is the most common phrase I ever heard growing up was eat this, because that was how they said I love you. I never heard those words from my family members.
Love it. If anyone has a questions, we are gonna have to be on a microphone, so sorry to do this and put you on a spot, but you're gonna have to come over here.
My name is Zoya, and
Did you say Zoya?
yes.
That's my mom's name.
No way.
Give me a hug.
Such a beautiful name.
I cannot believe this. Like, no one has my mom's name. Like, I've never heard it.
Food has always been political, whether we say it or not, but now is the time to say it. And Joanne, I want to thank you for having the courage to speak about what's been happening in Palestine, especially in Gaza, and having that dinner party 3 weeks ago that you did with your friend and hosting a vegan version of Palestinian food. As of December 1st, there have been 21,000 Palestinians killed. 8,300 of them are children, 4,700 of women. These numbers still include people under the rubble. I want to thank you again for your courage on speaking on behalf and uplifting the voices of the Palestinians. I'm getting to my question. You're no stranger to people stealing your content. I was going to use this example, and you said already about that one person who stole everything down to the cover, the font of your book. In a world where it's becoming so much easier to see the brazenness of intellectual property infringement, appropriation, and the erasure of origins of food from places like Asia, and Palestine and India, including, and the stories of those people under the guise of elevation. How do we as indigenous people from these lands and even diaspora protect and preserve the history of these foods and our stories?
That's such a great question. I wish it was as straightforward as just tell the stories, but it's just not, because there are always elements out there, and thank you for your question, Zoya, that are more concerned with making money and keeping the status quo, whether it's through power or money. And if that means silencing indigenous voices or deforming our stories, they'll do it. They will absolutely do it. I mean, we watched them do it for decades and decades and decades. I think, though, that's not a reason to not tell the stories, right? If we just say, oh, well, what's the point? My stories are just going to get distorted and silenced anyway. I'm just going to shut up and not do anything and just do my own thing, then that's not going to help either. I think that coalition building is incredibly important. And so, for example, I had a young woman who came up to me at an event last year, and she said that she's an Asian American and she wanted to publish a cookbook, and she went to an editor who was a cis, white, older gentleman. And the editor said, well, I'm sorry, but Asian cuisine, Asian authors, they don't do very well. And she was essentially denied a book deal based upon that. And lucky for her, she knew me, and she's like, well, can I just show you this one book that actually did really, really well? It's a New York Times bestseller. And I think that why I raised that is she reached out to me. She reached out to me at that party, and she also reached out to me on Instagram. And it was a great way to build this relationship where I was trying to help her, right? That's an intimate kind of example between two people. But if you magnify that example and you continue to have these types of relationships and you magnify your reach, you end up revealing this sort of burgeoning demand for authentic stories, for real storytelling. I mean, that's basically TikTok, right? In a nutshell, right? So you reveal that, hey, there's actually a demand here. And when policy and activism alone isn't enough to move the needle, well, then you have basic supply and demand economics that can help catapult it through capitalism, right? So we live in a capitalism, we live in this world. That's the world that we live in. And so if we want to make some sort of difference, then it's important to continue to coalition build in order to amplify the voice of that burgeoning demand that has otherwise been silenced in order to maintain a status quo. It's a very generalized answer. I wish I could be more specific. I'm not a policymaker, unfortunately, but that's just been my experience. I think that's essentially what has happened through TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Shorts creation, which is that it revealed there are a lot of people who are sick to death of whitewashed versions of our food.
Perfect. I just want to say that we are kind of running out of time, so I'm going to try to wrap this up because kitchens of all the 6 restaurants are closing within the next 10, 15 minutes, so make sure to order food. The Joanne is going to sit on that table right now. I'm going to set it up for you to sign the books. If you do not have a book but would love the book signed, at the Kale My Name over there counter, you can purchase a book and Joanne will sign it for you. You can also purchase it as a gift. 5 minutes. Sure, we will extend it. Oh, only 5 books left. Oh my God. Okay, well then better hurry to the counter. So, thank you. And yeah, make sure to order some food. Support all of these wonderful vendors. I'm not saying because of Kale My Name, but Chicago Hot Dog has a new item. Delongo Mexico has a new item. The pizza is amazing. Sushi is great. The donuts, bobas, and all the delicious food. The bar is out there. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. This was incredible.
Thank you so much.
So many of you, so grateful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Hungry Kales, watching this on the platforms. Thank you, Joanne, for taking the time.
I had so much fun.
It was amazing.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to see you next time here at Planex Market with another very interesting but very important conversation. All my love. Bye. Woo. Thank you.